In these first few videos that I've done, I've really stressed the importance of mindset in preference to the physical training, or as a prelude and part and parcel of your training. And I mentioned that when I first did it properly in 2012, on the lead up to it in those 5 months beforehand, I was obsessed about finishing. And what happened was, during that 5-month period leading up to the event, I did mostly my physical training with my friend Terry. And that year we did about 620 miles in practice, and then the event itself, which was the 85. So we did over 700 miles walking for the event, effectively. Now, obviously, if you look into it, you'll see that proper athletes who do marathon training, the top athletes, they do hundreds of miles a week just to do the marathon, but they're top athletes. What I'm talking about is, as a first-time beginner looking to do the Parish in this series, you want to do 85 miles. That's all you've got to do, 85 miles. So when I say about being obsessed, and you'll see as the time goes on and I do the training with Shelley, we're not going to be doing 600-700 miles of training. We'll do a lot less than that. But the actual amounts you'll see in due course. That first year, the 620 miles practice, did the event, finished just under 22 hours. The following year, did the event again. But that year I did a lot less training. It was around about 250 miles maximum of training. And I changed that particular year how I was eating as well, as an experiment, which I'll talk about later, going from eating carbs to not eating carbs. And that really was an experiment that year, 2013. But I dropped my time by just under an hour, and I did it in just over 21 hours for 2013. So I did more or less a third of the mileage in training, more or less. But I improved my time by nearly an hour, even though I changed how I was eating, and I was going into the unknown that particular year with regards to nutrition and whether or not I could actually do it. It was somewhat of a gamble nutrition-wise, but I can explain about nutrition in some of the later videos. My point, though, is being obsessed doesn't mean you have to go out every single day and do 5 miles a day or 10 miles a day to do it. You can be obsessed mentally. You don't have to be obsessed physically. It's like this last week we've had the snow and the ice, and I've seen people out practicing. Now, obviously they're happy to do it, but in my mind, if you're out practicing in the dark on icy roads, potentially you're setting yourself up for injuries, and perhaps unnecessarily having injuries. One of the big things about doing the event is you have to get on the start line fit and healthy, injury-free. And I think part and parcel of that is approaching your training with the right mindset, to be obsessed about doing the event, correct, but not to overdo your training. That's how I look at it. Now, there's a word or a principle that applies in this situation, and it's known as the Pareto's principle. It's very famous, the Pareto principle, or otherwise known as the 80-20 principle. And I say it is pretty famous. If you don't know about it, just Google it, check it out, 80-20. But the gist of it is simply 20% of whatever input you do in any endeavor or any activity will give you 80% of the results. So if you do the inverse, 80% of what you do will only give you 20% of the results. So effectively 80% of what you're doing is a waste of time, and 20% gives you the most benefit. And it applies across lots of different spheres of life, like your clothing. 20% of your clothing you'll probably wear 80% of the time. You get the gist. The 80-20, it's only a rough guide. Some things are 10-90, 30-70, and so on. But 20% of your effort will give you 80% of the results. And so around the Pareto principle, 80-20, it's going to be different for all of us as to what 20% of your inputs is going to be the most appropriate for you to get the 80% benefit. So, like, I go on a lot about mindset. That for me is one of the 20% that I focus on, mindset. But in terms of the physical training, the terrain that you're going to be walking on, obviously around the island, it's not flat. It is in places, but there's lots of hills as well. So you might want to focus part of that 20% on training on the hills, up and down, because up obviously is hard, but going downhill can be just as hard because you're race walking, you can't run. So when you're going down steep hills, you're going to have to practice going down hills and not running. So that might be something that you want to approach as part of your 80-20 principle. You might need to improve your strength, your muscular strength. So maybe going to the gym will be part and parcel of the 20% that you'll also focus on. And as I touched on previously, the nutrition, that also might be, or in fact it should be, part of the 20% to focus on. So you can practice the nutrition that you need for while you're walking. So yeah, all these different things you can investigate for yourselves and test. That's the whole point. You have to test what works for you, because we're all different. But if you take that on board and think about it, Pareto principle, 80-20, focus on the 20%. You don't have to do it all, but experiment for yourself. So that's it for today's video. I hope you found something of benefit in it, and I'll catch you in the next one.